We are mere weeks away from the Overwatch League playoffs, and while we have a rough idea of what the picture's looking like, a lot of things can change in a matter of weeks. Technically speaking, no team is officially out of the playoffs yet. Even the league bottom feeders still have a shot of making the play-ins if a couple of things, and by a couple I mean a lot of things, go their way. With 20 teams still in the race, it can be a little confusing to keep track of, so allow for me to help before the final stage of play gets underway. In this video, we're going to discuss the current playoff picture. We'll cover everything from who's already qualified to top eligible seeds to the current outlook of the play-ins and what teams on the outside looking in need to do. As a reminder, here's how playoff seeding works this year. The teams with the top 6 records in the West and the top 3 records in the East will automatically be going to Anaheim for the LAN event. To complete the 12-team bracket, 2 teams from the West and 1 from the East will make it through a play-in tournament from both regions. Seeds 7 through 10 in the West and 4 through 6 in the East will all have a chance to make the playoffs by the end of October, which means that in total, 16 teams have at least some sort of chance to win a championship. Here's where your team currently stands in the playoff journey. I suppose a good place to start is an outlook of who has already punched their tickets. As of right now, the Shock, Fuel, and Gladiators are qualified in the West, while the Dragons and Dynasty have locked up a spot in the East, which means that 5 out of 9 spots have been taken so far in terms of automatic qualifiers. And technically, all of them still have the opportunity to be the number 1 seed in the entire bracket. Right now, the Shock are currently in the lead, but all it takes is a losing streak for that to change, especially with Dallas right down their necks. Anything can happen, but as of right now, it would go Shock, Fuel, Dragons, Dynasty, then Gladiators in the current order. But what 4 teams will be automatically joining them before the play-ins? Over in the East, it seems like a 2-team race between the Fusion and the Spark for the 3 seed. The Hunters technically have a chance still, but it would require a flawless stage, and the Fusion and the Spark as well to go 1-6 each. So in other words, I'd say the Hunters are basically screwed and are more likely looking towards the play-ins. Fusion versus Spark though? Now that's a bit more interesting. They're currently tied at 12 points apiece, but the Spark have the advantage thanks to the map differential. The Fusion really need the Spark to just be mediocre at best, because that map differential could end up being the death of them. This really could come down to their matchup later this week to decide who makes it to the playoffs automatically. I mean, it's going to be a dogfight. If these two tie with their point totals, the Spark are probably going to get in over Philly. I'd look for the Fusion to get the point advantage if they want to make it through. But regardless, I'd say that the competition between these two is going to be pretty intense all stage long to avoid the play-ins. They play the same opponents, so it really comes down to who's more clutch. Okay, but what about the West? Well, that's a bit more up in the air. Seeds 4 through 9 all technically have a chance to make it in. Leading the pack would be the Houston Outlaws, who have a really good chance of locking up their spot pretty early on. With a 3-point lead over the next highest seed, all it really takes is like a 1 or 2, and they'll be golden. None of the teams below them are all that known for going on these crazy hot streaks and having these super dominant stages, so they should be okay. As for everybody else, it's a massive crapshoot. London and Toronto, they currently have the final 2 spots at 13 points apiece, but Atlanta, Florida, and Washington could probably take their place if one of them were to go cold. A lot of the teams mentioned just now do not have a very easy schedule, so unfortunate events could be just around the corner for a couple of these teams. The Defiant in particular could be in big danger, seeing as they play the Reign literally this first week, followed by the Shock, Outlaws, and Mayhem. There's a world where they could only win like 2 games, and that's when somebody like Florida or Atlanta could very easily swoop in and steal away a playoff spot. The Defiant really need to show us that the end of last stage was not a joke, or they're going to be in huge trouble. Someone who's maybe a bit less in trouble though is the London Spitfire. I'd say that there's a good chance they could end up going 3-3 this stage. They have 3 hard games in LA, San Fran, and Dallas, but in return they get Vancouver, Paris, and New York. Something worth mentioning though is the Shock are the final game of the year for them, and by that point San Fran may already have the 1 seed locked up, leading to them not totally trying here, which means the Spitfire could end up sneaking out a 4-2 stage, and if they do that, that's probably enough. Talking about the teams on the outside looking in, the Reign are the team to look out for. They have a lot of tough games, but most of them happen to be winnable. And it just so happens that 3 of those matchups are against teams that are also in the hunt. A strong bounce back stage from the rain would likely give them the nod for top 6. Aside from their matchup with the Shock, there's a real possibility that they could win every single game. I don't expect them to, but it's something worth mentioning. And who knows, maybe they even get a free win against Dallas in the final game of the season if they decide to rest and not go all out. If you're a Reign fan, you have to at least feel somewhat intrigued with your chances. But of course, they don't entirely control their own destiny, especially if they cannot defeat Toronto this week. They're going to need them or London to maybe choke a little if they want to end up making it through, which could be nerve-wracking for the fans. When considering Florida's positioning, they'll need even more luck. Being 2 points behind is not a very easy thing to overcome. They're going to have to play very well. If Florida fans want some good news though, they do happen to run into both Toronto and Atlanta this stage. If you get wins over both of them, suddenly things could be looking pretty good for you. Their schedule outside of the Gladiators matchup is looking pretty doable, and the fact that they have some major opportunities to gain some ground means their chances are very much alive. But it definitely will require a little luck from their opposition. I mean, we're talking a 4-win stage bare minimum with London and or Toronto winning like 2 games only. They need some luck. On the topic of luck, the Washington Justice are also not completely out of it. If they were to win like 5 or 6 games, as crazy as it sounds, and everybody else is maybe below average, they've still got an opportunity here. I, for one, though, would say that with that in mind, their chances are basically dead, especially because they play San Fran and Dallas back-to-back in the first week, and I need not remind both of you that they still have something to play for this early on. Consider this a race between seeds 5 through 8 in the West, with Houston likely being all set and Washington being too far away. Now we can focus in on the play-in tournament, where yes, every team is technically still in the race. In the East, it's a relatively simple process. Either the Spark or Fusion are guaranteed to get one of the play-in spots because they're both so ridiculously ahead of the 3 other teams in the conference. I mean, an 0-6 stage still might be enough for them. That's how good of shape they're in. So in reality, this is basically a contest of deciding who's going to play Philly or the Spark in the play-in finals. The Hunters currently sit at 5th with 7 points, but the Charge are close behind. They both have a pretty decent lead over the Valiant, who are on the outside looking in. The main objective at the end of the day is to avoid them, right? The Valiant are public enemy number 1. They've got to beat them on the schedule, plain and simple. Luckily for them though, I'd say LA's road to overcoming one of them is pretty brutal. They aren't in the best of places right now, and it would likely be required for them to win like 3 games minimum this stage, while the Charge in particular have to go on a massive cold streak. And if we're talking about Chengdu, I mean it only gets harder. We're talking an even bigger winning streak and a bigger losing streak. Unfortunately for the Valiant, a really bad summer showdown has put them in a really rough spot. It's not impossible, but they're not going to get any favors in this situation. They have to bank on the Charge playing really bad up until that final week of play when they get a chance to knock them out. The Charge and Hunters essentially control their own destiny. It's up to them to finish the job now. If they just do okay, that's more than likely enough. Over in the West, even though there's more teams, the play-in picture is mostly set in stone. Whoever gets hot between seeds 5 through 8 likely gets to avoid play-ins altogether. If they don't get automatic playoffs though, we know that Houston, London, Toronto, Atlanta, Florida, and Washington all have a guaranteed spot in the play-ins no matter what unfortunate circumstances come their way during these final 6 games. The seeding will vary, of course, but 3 of these teams are going to be going head-to-head in a winner-go-home scenario with the other seed yet to be determined completely. I'm of course talking about the number 10 seed. It's currently a 4-team race. I mean, in reality it's 3, but anything's possible, I guess. Currently, the Boston Uprising have a 2-point advantage over the Vancouver Titans, who are next in line for the 10 seed. Following Vancouver is New York at 3, and Paris with a measly 1. Paris really should not be in this conversation, but technically it is still possible. However, if they want it to happen, it's basically going to require a 6-0 stage, with Boston going winless, Vancouver winning no more than 2 games, and New York winning no more than 3. Their map differential is just so ridiculously bad that they cannot afford to have any ties. It has to be flawless play. I mean, that's obviously a lot, so it's very unlikely. I'm pretty sure you'd have better odds of winning the lottery at this point than Paris going to the play-in tournament. It's just not going to happen. They aren't eliminated just yet, like mathematically, but it's only a matter of time. Let's talk about the guys who actually have a chance. I'd say that Boston have a really good shot of keeping this lead. That 2-point advantage is pretty huge, but they also have a great end-of-the-year schedule to take advantage of to maybe get a couple of free wins. Early on, I think it could be scary for Boston fans. Their first 4 matchups are all pretty tough. However, they could be taking advantage of their final week of play versus Paris and New York, so I'd be very surprised if they don't go 2-4 bare minimum, and that might be just enough to get them by. New York and Vancouver have noticeably harder schedules, they need to have a better record overall, and have been painfully inconsistent on the year. New York and/or Vancouver would have to make a sick final push to even stand a chance. I mean, we're talking some big-time upsets. Could either of them pull it off? I mean, with how Vancouver have played as of late, it might be possible. Aside from the Glads and Fuel, they have a lot of upset potential in their matches. And New York, while they haven't played great as of late, they still do have a pretty talented roster overall, so you never really know. The early weeks of this stage could be a real sweatfest between 3 of the bottom 4 teams in the West. It's going to be epic for sure. Can the Boston Uprising stay in control? Or can Vancouver have a chance at playoffs for the first time since 2019? Or maybe, just maybe, we'll see Yaki finally get his chance to return to glory. It's going to be very fun to find out. I mean, you wouldn't expect any of these teams to do much regardless of what happens because a lot of other teams are just better than them, but you never know, right? All it takes is 1 or 2 games and suddenly your fate could end up changing, and that is why it's worth talking about. Anyway, that pretty much does it for the current playoff picture heading into the final 4 weeks of play. Only 5 teams are in for sure right now. Who's going to join them in their quest for glory at the first full-on LAN tournament with every team since 2019? Place your bets right now. And if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to my channel if you're new. And let me know your thoughts on the playoff race down in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And as always, thank you all so much for watching my content. I appreciate you so much. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.